Hello everyone and welcome. Today we have a very interesting Zelda news story. It seems dungeons, yes, real dungeons, may return with Breath of the Wild 2. This all comes thanks to a new job listing from Nintendo for someone to work on dungeons, terrains, and more. GamesRadar has a quick write-up summing up everything we need to know. They say, Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel job listing shows dungeons will be a bigger deal this time. Written by Connor Sheridan, with the tagline, Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel will have new terrain according to these job listings. The first thing we saw of the Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel was Link and Zelda exploring a very dungeon-esque subterranean ruin, and some new job postings from Nintendo further hint that dungeons will be a much bigger deal this time around. The company recently shared a Japanese listing for terrain designer and level designer contract positions, both of which mention dungeons. Yes, that's right. Both job descriptions mention dungeons. The listings are mostly composed of standard information such as preferred experience and potential compensation. However, the descriptions of the jobs themselves give us a little more insight into the Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel. The terrain designer position will work on parts of the game such as field dungeons, and the level designer will work on game event, dungeon, field planning. The latter position will also help with work on creating and tweaking enemies, in case you were worried that the sequel wouldn't expand on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild's relatively limited cast of enemies. Breath of the Wild did have proper dungeons in the form of divine beasts, but they were optional and not the height of Zelda dungeon design. The many shrines studded across Hyrule offered novel combat and puzzles, but in much shorter bursts than the sprawling dungeons of more classical Zeldas. That terrain designer position in particular makes it clear that Nintendo is planning to build more full-on dungeons into the game that are accessed from the field or open world. Plus, they'll have new terrain, so they won't just be a rehash of places you already explored in Breath of the Wild. Nintendo's doing its best to keep us in suspense for details, but we do know that Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel DLC is a strong possibility. Heck, the whole concept for the game started because Nintendo just had too many ideas to fit into DLC for the original. So yeah guys, that's basically the news. The important things here are that the current enemies are going to be getting some tweaks, possibly getting some new versions, similar to how we had electric, ice, and other variations of the same enemies. Maybe we will get new types, similar to the zombie-esque bokoblins from Skyward Sword. Hopefully that's not all though. Personally, I was hoping for new enemies to be added to Breath of the Wild via one of its DLC packs. I mean, I would absolutely love to see what a Dark Nut or similar enemies look like in the Breath of the Wild style. The same way that the Lynels are meant to be an intimidating force. Imagine coming across a Dark Nut, and just like in Twilight Princess or Ocarina of Time, they begin heavily armored, moving kind of slow but attacking very forcefully. As the fight progresses, they lose more and more of their armor and their giant weapon. So now instead of being slow, they are a lot faster, and instead of having a more defensive slow combat style with heavy weapons, they are now much more aggressive, much faster. Having that sort of dynamic and ever-changing fighting technique was something that only a few enemies in Breath of the Wild actually had. An example of this, at Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild, some of the chambers or the rooms on the outside that you would walk into, they were sort of giant circle-shaped rooms. The doors would shut, and a Lynel or another enemy would appear and attack you. Instead of this happening, imagine walking into an empty room, no enemies, nothing, but then one of these statues starts to come to life. How epic would that have been? It would have been a fantastic way to show off a new enemy once you got to Hyrule Castle, and would explain why they weren't out in the open field, like the Lynels are. Anyways, I am all for returning dungeons. Themed temples and other dungeons was something that a lot of people missed from Breath of the Wild, so if they bring those back, I think it would be amazing. I'm still a huge fan of the shrines though, but we don't need 120 of them. Actually, it's more like 150 or more if you add all of the DLC packs from the Breath of the Wild expansions. So while we don't need 120 or more, I would love to see 50, 60, or even 75. Honestly, the more the better, but it doesn't need to be too much more than 50. So in Breath of the Wild 2, give us 50 or more new shrines, and take the time you would have spent working on the other 70 or even 100 shrines, get rid of those, use the time and those concepts and puzzle mechanics that you would have used in all of those extra shrines, put them into actual temples or actual dungeons. And if we are reusing the world of Breath of the Wild, you can easily explain why they weren't in the original. For example, the water temple is mostly located under the water, which we could not get to in Breath of the Wild. There was no underwater exploration, so that easily explains why we couldn't see the water temple. And if they weren't feeling that creative to give a real logical answer, they could just do what they did with the Breath of the Wild DLC, or even how they literally began Breath of the Wild, where you go to a new Sheikah Slate pedestal, use your Sheikah Slate or do something, and all of a sudden, dozens of these new Sheikah towers are suddenly rising from the ground. And in the DLC, you literally do the same thing again, and this explains why and how there are suddenly new shrines rising up in the water. And even from the ground. The ground could easily say they were there the entire time, and just like the past shrines, the past Sheikah towers, and even the old guardians and divine beasts, they were just lost or hidden underground the entire time. Maybe a lot of snow and ice melts from the Hebra Mountains or one of the other icy and snowy areas, and suddenly we see a new snow temple or ice-themed dungeon, something similar to the Snow Peak ruins in Twilight Princess. They could literally reuse the entire area from Breath of the Wild as they are planning on, and easily explain why we didn't see these new dungeons and temples in the original game. Now, what I would absolutely love to see in Breath of the Wild 2, give us the same Hyrule, but also give us a new Dark World or Low-Rule version of this Hyrule. So the entire landmass, everything is familiar, but now instead of having the castle, we have a pyramid. Now instead of a lake, it's a swamp or something similar. Make it the same way that Low-Rule and the Dark World from A Link Between Worlds and A Link to the Past is an almost identical mirror image of the real Hyrule. This would be a very, very easy way to reuse all of Hyrule to quickly make an entire new world. Again, we already know they are reusing Hyrule. And if they don't want to spend a lot of time creating a new world that is roughly the same size, then they just do what they've always done and give us a mirror image of it. Some quick changes, as I mentioned, and it would be perfect. Maybe these new dungeons could be in the Dark World instead of the world that we have now. Or maybe another great idea that I would love to see, maybe you go to the Temple of Time, place your sword inside of a pedestal that's just magically there now. Maybe the goddess statue falls over, or something happens and there is now a pedestal there. Once you place your sword in it, you are suddenly warped back 100 years or 1,000 years or whatever, and you get to see what this Hyrule looked like back in its prime. Similar to how a lot of people wanted to play through the memory sections of Breath of the Wild so they could see what the castle town and everything looked like when everything, wasn't completely destroyed. I mean, Nintendo took all of this time to make Hyrule look amazing, especially the castle town and those cutscenes. But despite spending all that time creating it, it's only seen for a few seconds in cutscenes, not explorable. That sucks. And since they already have it literally made, like it's physically there, we just can't access it. Just simply bring in what they've already created for Breath of the Wild 2. But anyways, those are my ideas. Let me know what yours are. What kind of dungeons would you like to see return? Aside from the typical water, fire, forest themed temples and dungeons, I really enjoyed the concept that Skyward Sword gave us, where you could explore a dungeon once and then return to it later on, and suddenly there's a lot more to explore now that we have unlocked a new weapon for it. Or even how the ancient cistern was half water temple, half shadow temple. The zombie-esque bokoblins that I mentioned earlier, that's sort of where they came from. You would fight normal bokoblins above ground, but then this water-themed dungeon, the Ancient Cistern, had a world below where everything was much darker. There was an eerie vibe to it. Even the enemies were, again, darker themed, literally zombies. Anyways guys, I love talking about this stuff. We will be talking more about it in our upcoming Hylian Gamescast episode. So if you have any questions that you would like us to answer on it, please post them below and we will answer as many as possible. We also have our new series up, where we take in Zelda theories from fans like yourself. We put 5 of the best in a new video every week, and then all of us, including you, we all vote on which Zelda theory is the best. And whoever wins gets a free amiibo of their choice, or a free $20 eShop gift card, where we will simply email you or send you a message with the code. That way we don't actually have to physically mail you a card. You can just get it instantly, type in the code on your Wii U, 3DS, your Switch, or whatever, and download any game that you want. We also need a name for that series, so if you can think of a name for a weekly series where we review and discuss the 5 best submitted Zelda theories, please let us know. And finally, I am done rambling. So leave all of your thoughts to all of this in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Of course, if you support us on Patreon, you can join the podcast and the other weekly series where we review all of these Zelda theories. And if you are a Patreon supporter and you submit a Zelda theory, it will be guaranteed to be on the show, similar to how we do our Zelda mailbag on our podcast, to where you are guaranteed to have your question answered every week if you are a Patreon supporter. Again, thank you everyone. Have a great day.
Hey everyone, it's me again, Elia Rose. I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching this video. And you know what? If you're a fan of videos like this, you should totally subscribe and give this video a like and comment below to let us know what type of videos you would like to see us create in the future. And if you would really like to support all of us here at the GameOverJesse channel, please consider purchasing a GameOverJesse t-shirt or becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/GameOverJesse, where you can receive many rewards, such as getting shoutouts, having any topic or theory that you select discussed on the podcast or made into its own video, having your question answered, joining on as a guest on the podcast, and playing with us during our Twitch live streams at twitch.tv/GameOverJesse, and much, much more.